Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas, their time, and their energies to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What changes in their field have they witnessed? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. The story you will hear today is of the well-known Dottie Ray. Dottie received her BA in journalism at Iowa in 1944 and her MA in 1945. While a student at Iowa, she was editor of the Daily Iowan and a news broadcaster on WSUI. Besides being a wife, mother of 2 daughters, host of a local radio show for over 34 years, she has given much to this community. She has lent her support to the Board of United Way. She was active in fundraising efforts for the Ronald McDonald House, advocate for the handicapped, involved in Goodwill Industries, President's Club, the Prusso School of Music, where she's serving as the foundation chair. She's currently fundraising for the Lutheran Social Services Building Campaign, and she's just wrapped up being the co-chair of the Iowa City Regional Campaign for Endowment 2000. Quite a record. And over the years, she's received many awards. In 1962, she won a Matrix Award for Outstanding Women in Journalism, given by Theta Sigma Phi. She won the Service to Mankind Award, presented by the Old Capitol and University of Iowa Sertoma Clubs. And in '87, the University of Iowa awarded her the Hansher Finkbein Alumni Medallion, which recognizes leadership, loyalty, and learning. That was quite an introduction, Dottie. And your story begins, I know, in Eagle Grove, where you grew up, and you came to Iowa as a journalism major and became editor of the Daily Iowan. What an exciting time.
A long time ago, but yes, it was exciting. It was during the war, and so we had the only, to my knowledge, all-woman staff on the Daily Iowan. And we wore black blazers that said the Daily Iowan. As I look at it now as an adult, I can't believe we did, but we wore them and with great pride.
A whole women's staff?
Whole women's staff put out the Daily Iowan. Mm-hmm.
Well, there weren't many men on campus at the time because of the war?
Not that many. Because of the war and because the women were very good. That's why.
Right, of course. What were some of your recollections about this? I mean, what a historical time in the early 40s. The world was changing and...
The world was changing enormously, and D-Day and all of the excitement, Mr. Roosevelt dying, that stands out strongly, but also the little things. As I said, the all-girl staff and all-woman staff, and one, see, we say women now instead of girls, that shows my age. One recollection I have was something which was very interesting in Iowa City. On D-Day, we put out an extra because it happened during the night. And so we went out all over Iowa City screaming extra, extra at 2 and 3 in the morning. And again, as I think of that now with television and all the modern equipment we have now that tells us what's happening almost before it happens. But that at 3 in the morning to have good friends out in Manville Heights screaming extra, extra and lights going on was very exciting.
Now, it was tricky to get girls out. Those were the years of the hours, weren't they?
That's right. Hours in the dorms were 10:30, and that was one reason that everyone loved, all the reporters, everyone loved working on the Daily Iowan, because of course they could have special permission. And I'm sure that was one of my goals, because hours even then didn't make any sense to me. And so we, the editors on the Iowan had no hours, which was lovely.
Oh, you didn't
had
have
a key
to
to Courier Hall,
10:30.
which was the only dorm on campus, I might add.
Oh, what was happening on campus in those days?
Well, campus was very interesting. Around 10,000 people, students, and a faculty that was very caring, and it was very special. Then the Navy pre-flight was over across the river, and the meteorologists were in East Hall, which is now Seashore Hall, and so there were loads of men, but not on the campus.
Any special issues burning on campus in those days?
Well, we started student government. Interestingly enough, as the day we're doing this show, I read in the paper this morning that a committee on campus has just decided to change student government on the campus, and I thought, oh, the wheel goes round and round, because C. Woody Thompson was Dean of Students then, and he had the first student government, and we were all involved in it. So this was the beginning of the students taking over.
The paper, of course, was behind this.
Very
the
much so. Oh
editorials.
my, yes, editorials, everything, yes.
You left Iowa City in the late 40s and then returned in 1950.
That's
correct?
right, yes.
What brought you back?
Well, I left Iowa City and worked in an advertising agency, Amber Advertising Agency in Cedar Rapids, then went to the Iowa Development Commission. Rodney Q. Selby was the first director, and he had me come, and I was publicity and promotion, and I loved that.
Oh,
but in the meantime, I had become engaged to Robert Ray. We had received our masters together, and then he'd gone on and received his PhD. He did his major research on Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Dewey, and when he was interviewing and doing that, he met Mr. Dewey several times, and so Mr. Dewey hired him as he got his PhD to come to work for him in Albany, New York. And so,
in what capacity, excuse
well,
me?
he was a speechwriter and traveled with Mr. Dewey and went through the gubernatorial campaign, then the presidential election of '48, and then the next gubernatorial campaign. And so I went to Albany, and we were married there and lived there 3.5 years. Then Mr. Hancher, president of the university, wanted to start an Institute of Public Affairs. And so he contacted Bob and asked him to come back. And in 1950, we came back. We moved from a one-bedroom apartment where you had the first Simmons hide-a-bed ever made, plum damask, which we opened out every night. We lived a block from the Capitol. It was an idyllic life for two young people.
Sure.
And Bob traveled on the train with Mr. Dewey and was very involved. And that was an exciting 3 years. I appreciate it now more than I did then. I thought, why not then? But now I appreciate it. Moved from that one-room apartment on 3rd floor to rent the only house available in Iowa City, which belonged to Winfred T. Root, a professor who had just passed away in political science. It's an enormous house, if anyone knows Iowa City, on Church Street, and the Hillcrest home is now there, so you know how big it is. And we moved into this home filled with antiques and oriental rugs and china and crystal. You know, we tiptoed for a year as we tried to buy a house. Then, or find a house. We did buy a house, and that became our home for 30-some years.
30-some years. And so your husband was busy starting this new
Institute of Public Affairs. Then he became Dean of Special Services. Then he became Dean of Continuing Education. And so he had a great life. He passed away in 1982.
And during this time that he was involved, so heavily involved, working on his projects, you were starting a career in radio. I mean, you'd had a career a little bit in college because you worked on
kind of
WSUI.
accidental. When we were living in the Root House, and as I say, what we were glorified janitors. That's what we really were, with an enormous rent, we thought. But anyway, WSUI, Pearl Bennett Broxham was the program director at WSUI and in charge of it, and she called and asked if I would do an interview show on WSUI 3 mornings a week. And so I did and enjoyed it very much, and did that until our first child came, and then decided that I needed to be home with a child, and did. It turned out that our child was handicapped. She was born without sight, and had some more difficulties, and so I couldn't leave her. And about that time, Gene Clausen had started KXIC and asked if I would start a show, and I couldn't leave. But on Saturdays, Bob would be home. So that's when I became President Alice, which was one of the highlights of my life.
Oh, tell us about
All right.
President Alice. What a wonderful
KXIC
name.
That's right. KXIC was on 3rd floor of the Whetstone building. And every Saturday morning, I would go up there, and I was President Alice. And for half an hour, any child who had had a birthday the week before or was to have a birthday the next week could come, and we would have a birthday party. And the dairy sent us chocolate milk in little cartons, and the bakery sent us chocolate cupcakes, always chocolate. And we would come. Well, I had as few as 3 and as many as 28, because you never knew. And that's learning firsthand about life. It was wonderful, and I adored
You had
it.
this live audience.
Live audience, half an
What
hour.
was the format of all these squealing little
Believe me, it
giggling-
changed hourly. We had a wonderful engineer who sat behind safety and glass, but he could play music and whenever it got out of hand, but it didn't. And a lot of youngsters who are now grown people still remember that show, that they were on it all those years ago, and things they said.
Did you interview them?
Interviewed them. And at that time,
Kind
you
of
could
an
ask...
Art Link letter.
Very much. And you could ask a youngster absolutely anything then. Now, you really wouldn't dare. You know, what does your mommy do? What does your daddy do? Et cetera. And it was fun. Radio was the only show in town, and it was fun.
Radio is quite wonderful. And that leads me into then, from President Alice, the Dottie Ray show.
Then Gene Clausen really wanted me to do a show, and I couldn't leave, by then, 2 youngsters. And so he said, all right, we'll bring the microphone to your home, which he did. And so that started it, and I raised my family around the microphone.
Tell me the intent. I mean, I'm sure 99% of Iowa Cityans have heard the Dottie Ray show, but when Gene came to you, the purpose, the intent of the show was informational or getting to know people, or what was?
It was wonderful that he didn't put any guidelines on. He just said, do it. And that was remarkable, to be able to just do it. And I had a different sponsor each day, still do. And right now I'd like to say something. I have never had a sponsor complain about a guest I had. Never have had to clear it, never have been given commercials to do. It's just always been complete freedom, and that's been wonderful. And Gene didn't put any guidelines. I'll tell you a funny story.
Oh, tell me. I want to hear a lot of stories.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I did that, I was going to interview, yes, but the idea was I could do anything I wanted to. So I thought, all right, I'll start out interviewing, but I'm going to become an expert on some things. I'm going to do shows, whole shows, 15 minutes or something. So I'd been on probably, 7 weeks, and maybe closer to 3 months, and I decided it was time that I would show this brilliance. So I went to the library and learned all about water conservation. I learned so much that I couldn't get it into one show. I scripted it, I typed it, I measured it, I did everything, and was all set. It had to be 2 shows, so I couldn't wait to do it. And finally, I allotted the time and did these 2 days of water conservation shows. I thought they were wonderful. Well, my guide on the show has always been what people say to me in response. You know, if I go to get gasoline and they'll say, boy, that was some guy you had on today, then that's a good show. Henry Lawson was running the market on the block from my home, which our life also revolved around. And I always knew he'd say, my, wasn't that interesting what that woman said this morning about, you know, and that was my guide. So after water conservation, I couldn't wait to get to the store. Nobody said a word. For 5 days, no one mentioned my shows on water conservation. Didn't even mention it. I was so crushed. So I went back and thought, okay, I'm meant to be an interviewer.
And not an expert, but you were ahead of your time about water conservation.
That's right.
Good for you.
That's right. I had to get those out. Maybe it would work now.
Dottie, you should do it now.
Why not?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, what I did,
That's a
every
wonderful
guest
story.
showed up and everything was fine. And all of a sudden, one day, Buford Garner was superintendent of schools, and he was to be on my show. He had asked to be on my show, and he, because he had something he wanted to tell people, which often happens. And so he called that morning and said, now I'm supposed to be there at 11:30, and blah, blah, yes, and he'd been on before, he knew right where to come, so I didn't think a thing of it. At that time, I had a theme song, which led into my show. And I, was working around and doing everything you do around a house, and all of a sudden I heard that theme song and realized that Buford wasn't there, and I hadn't been watching the clock because I just trusted him. I raced in and sat down, and they tell me what I said was, luckily this isn't taped. It wasn't taped then. They said what I said was, here I sit with sweaty hands and a statue of Abraham Lincoln, because Bob was a Lincoln admirer, and there was a statue in the den where I broadcast. And then I didn't know what to say. Silence. I'd never prepared for this. And I looked down, and the date of the calendar was there. And so I announced that date, which must have excited everybody. And then I said, this would have been my dad's birthday. I'm so sorry that my girls are growing up not ever having known their grandfather. And I went into a long story about him, how in the Depression he taught us that it didn't matter what you wore to a party. The most important thing you wore was the look on your face. And that's all you had to worry about. And the other thing he taught me was that to avoid being self-conscious, you never compared yourself with anyone else in the same room. When you walk into a room, you pick out someone in your thoughts and compare yourself to them, someone who's physically handicapped or mentally handicapped or socially handicapped. Compare yourself to them and how they would be so lucky to be able to walk into that room. And then you forget all the people. It might make you self-conscious if they have prettier jewelry, prettier clothes, prettier, brighter minds, etc. Well, it worked. It's always worked for me. I've always done that.
Wonderful advice.
It's wonderful. And so I went on and on and on.
About your father.
About my father. And finally the theme song started again, and I did the commercial and went, ugh. Well, my phone started ringing with people saying, I want a copy, want this, want that. One man even called me from Joliet, Illinois. It was before Interstate 80. He had been calling every stop he could, trying to get me because he wanted a script for his daughter. Well, that taught me the major lesson of my life. People who want to read about water conservation will go to the library themselves. They want personal stuff. So from then on, believe me, that show got very personal. And the dog barked and the kids cried, and it was fun.
And people have loved it and continue to love it.
It taught me a major lesson.
And whatever happened to Garner?
Brilliance. I gave up. Garner had been coming from the office, and a train, the trains on Benton Street, stopped him, and he couldn't get through. The train stopped. He was so embarrassed. So then he came on the next day. He came on the next day.
So, Dottie, people call you and say, "Can I be on your show?"
Oh, yeah.
And then you obviously do some research or read, or how else do you get your guests?
This is one of the sad parts right now to me. The show, because it's been on so many years, is now pretty routinized because community theater sets its schedule and call a year in advance and line up their 4 shows for their 4 shows.
Project Green, I'm sure, with the
Project
Green Garden Fair.
And Church Women United. And so you have all of those. Then you've got University Theater, and you've got people who are coming to town. I'm going to have thus and so come. So and so is going to come for thus and so, please. And so it isn't. I don't have as much leeway as I have, and certainly I don't have for children, which are my favorites.
I was going to say, I know you've done children.
Yeah, and that's my favorite. I'd live with kids if I could. Used to be that you had August and a lot of December, but that's changed in Iowa City now. Summers have become as busy, and the community's changed, as you know.
Well, what did you interview the children about? Their projects or something that they'd done?
No, mostly just introduced them as kids. Just let them. I always felt, and I would go to a classroom once a year, or they would come to the station once a year and record, or they'd come to my home. And so people kind of followed that. I always used to do 2nd grade at Hoover School. Good friend of mine, Virginia Petty, was the teacher, and her kids would be on every year. And it's really good for kids. Once they've been on a microphone as children, they're never afraid again.
Well, so you've had people not, was Garner the only one who didn't show up?
Oh, my, no. No, through the years, a lot of people have. But there again.
What do you do then?
Well, now there are a lot of people who need shows, and I don't have the time. And I keep this packet of stuff down here by me that I can pull out and do what they want, or push something. Like when someone doesn't show up now, often I will literally read the senior newspaper that they put out from the senior center. That's a model newspaper. And a lot of people who aren't 55 and over, who don't receive it, don't know those things are going on at the senior center. But they know someone who would benefit them, and they'll say, they heard on my show thus and so, and they'll say to a neighbor, can I take you? And get older people there. That senior center is a fantastic place.
It is. Did you ever get a guest who was tongue-tied?
Sure.
But you're so easy. You genuinely like people, and I think you make people feel at ease.
Well, that's nice of you to say. It isn't. Everybody has a story.
Isn't that true? I love people's stories. So you could get people.
Yeah, and see, I like people to come 15 minutes early, and we just talk about anything we won't talk about on the show. Then they're into it, and then when you get on, and I try never to embarrass anybody. I really wouldn't ever embarrass someone, ever.
So you've got another year's worth of ideas on the Dottie Ray show. This is going to go.
It kind of carries itself now.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah. I'll interrupt here. One of the real bonuses of that show, it's probably the best friend I have. And one of the real bonuses is that it's the easiest way to keep alert to what's happening in the community. And because of that, you're in on plans for the university. Like I still remember when Oak Knoll was in the planning stage. There was a woman here named Mother Hubbard. She used to have a column in the Press Citizen, and she was one of the people who got Oak Knoll started. And she talked to me about it and went on the show about it, saying we have this dream kind of thing. And then you watch it happen. As a matter of fact, I had so many people on as Oak Knoll was being built, that people thought I had stock in it. I mean, it was a non-profit organization, but you do that. They dig the first spade, and you get their dreams. And they had to sell the apartments before people would move in. Now it's a model for all over the nation.
People are so happy there.
Yes.
Tell me, you also, one of the things I talked to some of your friends and admirers about, that you have this ability to organize, and when you were a young mother, not only were you on the radio, but you started this Altrusa room. Do you remember?
I remember it very well. The school nurses needed desperately, we didn't have a Goodwill then, of course, and so they needed desperately a place where youngsters who come to school without proper clothing could be taken care of. And so this group of women organized, Altrusa sponsored it, and Lois Bulwar gave us a garage free on Governor Street, and we organized and collected all the clothing, put it on racks, and then volunteers staffed it. And the school nurse would take the youngsters from school, outfit them, and get clothing ready for them to go home, and then no one ever knew, and it fit them, and it was just like going to a department store, and it worked. And it was certainly not the forerunner of Goodwill, but it was a wonderful thing.
And you organized and got women volunteers and...
Yes, and they all volunteered their time, and they never missed, and they sorted and cleaned and hung and helped the nurses, and it worked beautifully.
And now, fortunately, we have Goodwill.
That's right. And many other human service agencies now. That's grown up. Iowa City is a sensational place, I think, for human service agencies.
I agree. Dottie, what person or persons or event has had a major influence on you? You said your radio show has been such a good friend over the years.
It really has been a good friend.
Is there a person or event that did? Your father sounded wonderful.
He was wonderful. Probably a man named Ward Barnes, who was the editor of the Eagle Grove Eagle, who, when I was in high school, hired me and said, you know, you learn typing and you can go. And I got to work for him in the Eagle Grove Eagle and through high school and junior college. And probably he affected me more because he made me see that you could come from a town of 4,000 and not be afraid.
And look at you now. Another thing you've become associated with over the years is the commencement announcing play-by-play of the graduation of the University of Iowa. As some reporter said, I was reading an article about this, that you kind of tell the story behind the mortarboards.
It's fun. I love it because I guess I'm a snoopy person, and I love to go over before commencement and talk to people who are graduating and parents who are graduating, and you get the feel. There is a story under every one of those mortarboards, and you see the parking lot filled with U-Haul trailers and all of that as they're headed out for their lives, and I love that.
Well, for 2.5 hours, that's a long time.
Well, a lot of that's someone calling names from the stage, so believe me, don't be that impressed.
What are some of the stories that you've heard and that you've shared over the years?
Oh, wonderful things. I still remember, especially in the ladies' restroom, you hear things a lot. You hear a lot of things. And there was this one special time that I remember so well that the two people were graduating, and the mother and father had not told them that they were leaving from there for the Rose Bowl. And they were heading out, and these kids didn't know that that was their plan. They thought they were going home, and they were heading out for the Rose Bowl. There are all sorts of things like that. You hear about jobs and interviews, and you see somebody standing back who maybe hasn't been as lucky, but it's a very poignant time. I love seeing all of the foreign students who come, and you'll see their people here who have befriended them through that wonderful organization of women and men who befriend our students from other countries. And you see them saying goodbye, knowing they may never see them again. And you see the pictures being taken, and commencement's a great time.
Well, I'm sure many people for this will tune in to you.
No, but and also I don't think there's anything lovelier than that stage filled with all the caps and gowns and all the color, and you know.
And you know so many people, and that's why I heard your most recent one, and you mentioned some local people, which was fun to hear that they were graduating.
No, and you see those parents come in, and you know what's gone into that degree and the hours and the money. No.
You know, in your introduction to today's show, I mentioned all the service organizations and the projects you've helped and supported. Is there one contribution that you're the most pleased about, or would that be unfair to single out? Because I know you...
Probably the Ronald McDonald House, I would guess.
Tell us about that.
All right, I will. My husband, as I said, passed away in 1982, and he said that we had time to talk. He had 2 weeks before he passed away. And he wanted his memorial to be the Ronald McDonald House. And I was all for it, because we were then wearing buttons and that sort of thing. I thought everybody knew about it. After he had passed away, I went home, and good friends were there, and the newspaper called, or they called the newspaper for the story or whatever. And I said that was to be the memorial. Well, they thought I was in shock. They thought Ronald McDonald was some kind of a hamburger place. I mean, this was it. And these are outstanding people in our community who had never heard of it, which startled me. And so that was the beginning. I don't mean to take any credit, but I meant that was the beginning of my interest in Ronald McDonald. And so I worked hard helping people to get tour knowledge, learn about that, and did radio shows and helped with the fund drive. And that home is just fantastic now. People like, you know, Helen Rossi in our community, and Betty Remington, and a lot of people who just, Rhoda Vernon, who just give their lives over there. I'm not connected with it in any way now, but I feel better about that in our community.
Wonderful.
The radio show has been an enormous friend here because, as I say, you're in on the beginning, and then, and I don't mean to take credit for any of this, I hope you understand.
I understand.
It's just publicity.
It's wonderful. What a beautiful home, a beautiful concept, and people are using it.
And volunteers man it now.
I know.
I'm not there anymore, but it's exciting to see. And there isn't anyone in Iowa City who doesn't recognize the Ronald McDonald home now. I mean, everybody knows it.
It's nationwide.
And they're springing up everywhere.
It's so amazing, all the different areas in Iowa City that you've touched, Dottie. What a wonderful, wonderful experience, and that you've given to our community.
Been very lucky.
My guest has been Dottie Ray, telling some of her stories. She's, as you know, a well-known host of a local radio show, graduate of the University of Iowa, supporter of innumerable civic and university organizations. She's been the recipient of many honorary awards over the years. When she was presented the Service to Mankind Award in 1984, the following words were a fitting tribute to her, and I quote, "Ray is a person that has influenced and touched the lives of thousands of people. Special recognition is being given to Dottie Ray for her public leadership, personal courage, and always congenial nature with which she carries out these challenges." What a tribute, and what a lady. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you.